Imagine this scenario for a second. You're sourcing furniture from Vietnam, and you have just negotiated a massive 40% cost advantage over your previous domestic supplier.
40%.
40%. I mean, on paper, it sounds like an absolute business cheat code. You place a huge order, you wire the deposit, and you wait.
Right.
Weeks later, this massive 40-foot shipping container finally rolls up to your U.S. warehouse. You cut the security seal, you swing those heavy metal doors open, and your heart just completely sinks.
Well, yes.
Yeah. You are staring at 200 ready-to-assemble cabinets with fundamentally misaligned doors. You've got bedroom sets with rough, unfinished edges. It is a total disaster.
Yeah, it's the ultimate sourcing nightmare. And, it happens far more often than people outside of global supply chain logistics realize.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've got distance, 12-hour time zone differences, language barriers. They all combine to create this immense, terrifying blind spot for importers.
Which, I mean, that makes sense. You can't just casually hop on a flight to Ho Chi Minh City every time a new production run starts.
Right. You'd be bankrupt just from the travel.
Exactly. Most importers, even the highly successful ones, they never actually set foot on the factory floor. So the mission of this deep dive today is to figure out how to bulletproof a supply chain from thousands of miles away. We are unpacking a masterclass on how to conduct pre-shipment inspections in Vietnam without being on the ground. And while we are focusing heavily on the mechanics of furniture production, this isn't just about cabinets and dining chairs.
No, not at all. It is a comprehensive framework for remote quality control, risk mitigation, and really just managing complex projects when you cannot physically be in the room.
Right.
Because my baseline philosophy has always been that knowledge is most valuable when it's actually applied. In the world of global trade, trusting your supplier is a wonderful starting point.
Sure.
But independently verifying their output, that is the only thing that actually protects your bottom line and your brand's reputation.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we get into the operational how of remote inspections, we really have to look at the why.
Yeah, the financial reality of it all.
Exactly. There is a very specific, almost catastrophic math involved in skipping quality control. When you look at the industry data on first-time buyers trying to cut corners, there's this classic trap involving dining chairs.
Oh, yeah. It is a trap I've seen play out time and time again.
So how does that usually start?
Well, a buyer looks at a quote and thinks, if I skip the third-party inspection, I can save $3 per chair.
Right.
It feels like a smart, lean business decision,
Yeah.
a calculated risk to pad the margin a little bit.
But let's look at what happens when that container actually arrives in Los Angeles. Typically, the math on a skip inspection is just brutal. You'll often see like about 8% of those chairs arrive with cracked backs. And then another 12% might have loose joints.
Which triggers an absolute avalanche of hidden costs.
Yep.
I mean, you aren't just losing the wholesale value of the broken chair. Think about the life cycle of that defect.
Right. The customer has to deal with it.
Exactly. The customer buys it, tries to assemble it in their living room, realizes it's broken, and calls customer service.
Right.
That is 30 minutes of paid staff time right there. Then you are paying restocking fees, return freight, which, by the way, is incredibly expensive for bulky furniture,
Oh, yeah.
and then shipping out a replacement part. In a typical container load, an acceptable level of defects might cost a few $100s. But unchecked, 20% defect rates easily spiral into $8,000 in operational losses.
Wow. Which totally flips the math. That $3 in upfront savings instantly transforms into a 70-cent loss on every single chair in the container.
Exactly.
The moment you start paying domestic shipping rates to fix international manufacturing errors, you are bleeding money.
You're bleeding money because a lot of importers, they fundamentally misunderstand how factory quality control works. There is a vital distinction in the manufacturing world between two acronyms, IQC and EQA.
Okay, break those down for us.
So IQC stands for Internal Quality Control. This is the factory's own team, embedded right there on the production line.
I mean, if I'm a factory manager, that sounds incredibly convenient. The workers are already there, and it doesn't cost the buyer anything extra.
It is convenient, yes, but you have to recognize the inherent conflict of interest. IQC is cheap and continuous, sure, but factories have a massive financial incentive to minimize defect reporting.
Oh, because fixing it costs them money.
Exactly. Reworking a product takes time, it slows down the assembly line, and it burns raw materials. So if a defect is borderline, maybe a paint finish is slightly uneven, an internal team might just let it slide to hit their daily production quota.
It's literally like letting a college student grade their own final exam.
Perfect analogy.
If their allowance depends on passing, they're going to find a way to give themselves a passing mark, even if the work is totally sloppy.
Precisely. Which is why professional importers rely on EQA, external quality assessment.
Okay.
This means hiring an independent third-party inspector who works strictly for you, the buyer. They do not care if the factory has to spend 3 extra days unboxing everything and fixing mistakes.
Right.
Their sole mandate is to measure the product against your rigid standards.
But I do want to push back on this a little bit, just from the perspective of a small business. Hiring an external inspector in Vietnam is going to run somewhere between like $300 and $600 for an 8-hour factory visit.
Right, that's the standard rate.
So if you are a small or mid-sized importer paying $600 out of pocket before a single item has even been sold, that feels like a pretty steep, bitter pill to swallow up front.
It certainly feels steep if you view it as just another operational expense. But you really have to view it for what it actually is, which is insurance. Look at the big picture here. You're paying $600 to protect a shipping container full of goods that represents a retail value of anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000.
Oh, right.
When you reframe it against the total value at risk, it is incredibly cheap insurance, especially when you consider that a professional external inspection catches over 95% of critical defects before the goods ever get loaded onto the ship.
Got it. So you are paying to keep the problem in Vietnam, where labor and rework are cheap, rather than paying 10 times as much to deal with the problem in Los Angeles.
Exactly.
But counting screws and checking paint takes a physical human body. Let's say we authorize that $600 and hire this independent inspector. What exactly are they doing when they walk onto that factory floor?
Well, it all starts with something the industry relies on heavily, called the golden sample.
Wait, so instead of just like emailing over a 3D CAD file or a PDF of a spec sheet and hoping for the best, you are physically matching the production line against a master prototype.
Exactly. The golden sample is a reference piece from your very first prototype run that both you and the factory have physically examined, tested, and agreed upon.
Okay.
You literally sign off on it, sometimes physically signing the bottom of the chair with a marker. From that point on, every subsequent shipment is measured against that physical object.
Which is brilliant because it eliminates all translation errors.
Right. It eliminates all ambiguity about what good actually means.
And from there, the inspectors use a very specific weighted checklist to break down what makes a product 100% acceptable. I imagine they aren't just looking at the furniture and saying, yeah, it looks good.
No, they need hard metrics.
Right. Let's walk through this list, starting with dimensional accuracy, which makes up 15% of the inspection.
So this is where they break out the digital calipers. They physically clamp these metal jaws around the joints and legs to check tolerances down to fractions of a millimeter. Yeah. For assembled furniture, the acceptable variance is typically plus or minus half a centimeter. But for precision components, like the metal tracks for sliding drawers,
Oh, that has to be tighter.
incredibly tight, plus or minus a quarter of a centimeter. If a dining table is supposed to be 180 centimeters long and it measures 181.5, that is a recorded defect.
Wow. Next up, taking 25% of the focus is surface finish and appearance. This is about establishing strict grading standards so the inspector isn't relying on opinion.
Right, you have to define the math for them.
Well, like, for example, you specify 0 major defects allowed, like deep gouges, but we will accept less than 1% of units having minor cosmetic issues, like a tiny scratch on the underside that can just be buffed out.
And then we move to hardware and fasteners, taking up another 20%. The inspector actually has to tear open the little plastic bags of screws and count them.
Oh, manually count them.
Manually count them.
Yeah.
Are all the bolts and hinges correct? Are they tightened to the right torque? For ready-to-assemble furniture, missing hardware is one of the single biggest triggers for negative customer reviews.
I can completely attest to that. It's the worst. They also perform physical use tests. The standard protocol for drawers and cabinet doors involves opening and closing them 5 times.
Yep.
Now, opening a drawer 5 times sounds almost overly simplistic. Is that really enough to test the long-term durability of a piece of furniture that a family is going to use every single day?
What's fascinating here is that the 5-pull test isn't really about simulating 10 years of use. It's like checking the alignment on your car.
Okay.
You don't need to drive 50,000 miles to know the suspension is busted. If the steering wheel violently shakes at 30 miles per hour, you already know the chassis is fundamentally misaligned.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. If a drawer binds, sticks, or squeaks within the first 3 or 4 pulls, it instantly signals a larger structural failure. It tells the inspector that the track wasn't installed straight, or the wooden frame itself is actually warped.
So it's a canary in the coal mine.
Exactly. It's a low-effort test that reveals highly complex hidden problems.
That leads perfectly into the next category, which is 25% of the inspection, structural integrity. And they aren't gentle with these pieces.
Not at all.
They perform a 100-kilogram static load test on chairs, which involves dropping heavy weights onto the seat to simulate a person sitting down abruptly. And they closely examine traditional woodworking elements, looking for what's called daylight, through a mortise and tenon joint.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar, a mortise and tenon is a classic joint where a projecting wooden peg, the tenon, fits snugly into a carved hole, which is the mortise.
Right.
If an inspector can see light shining through the tiny gap where those two pieces of wood meet, that joint is inherently loose.
Even if it feels solid in the factory.
Even then, it might hold together tightly enough to survive the ocean voyage. But the moment a customer actually shifts their weight on it in their dining room, that joint will inevitably loosen, wobble, and fail.
Finally, the last 15% is packaging and documentation, doing drop tests on the cardboard boxes, making sure there is adequate foam padding on the delicate corners, and verifying that the English assembly instructions actually made it into the box.
Crucial step.
So that is the checklist. But how do you actually verify that a stranger in a factory 12 time zones away is doing these exact tests and not just sitting in the break room checking boxes on a clipboard?
It all comes down to who you hire and the technology stack you use to keep them accountable.
Okay.
The industry generally relies on 3 distinct tiers of remote help.
Let's go through them. Tier 1 is hiring independent global firms. We are talking about massive, internationally accredited companies like SGS, Bureau Veritas, Intertek, or 2.
Right, the big players.
They cost between $400 and $800 and can usually deploy a certified inspector within 3 to 5 days anywhere in Vietnam.
This is generally considered the absolute gold standard for professional importers. You send them your checklist, they deploy a highly trained auditor, and you get a completely objective, standardized report.
Tier 2 is using a local sourcing agent. This is a bit cheaper, usually $300 to $500 per visit.
And sourcing agents can be incredibly valuable because they often already have a relationship with the factory management.
Right, they know the people.
Exactly. And they deeply understand your specific product niche. But quality control isn't always their primary skill set, so their thoroughness can vary wildly.
Yeah.
You really have to vet their inspection capabilities carefully.
And then Tier 3 is for the heavy hitters doing massive volume, keeping a retained local quality engineer on payroll. For roughly $800 to $1,200 a month, you get a dedicated full-time person who acts as your permanent eyes and ears on the ground.
Which is amazing if you have the volume for it.
Exactly. But regardless of whether you use a global firm or a local agent, the tech stack has completely revolutionized how this data crosses the ocean.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Gone are the days of waiting 48 hours for a massive blurry PDF to download over email.
Right.
Today, professional inspectors use centralized software platforms like Kinspect, Inspectorio, or Elevado. These applications digitize the entire checklist process.
So as the inspector moves through the factory, they are inputting data on a tablet, and it populates a real-time, color-coded dashboard on your end.
Exactly.
If something goes wrong, you can jump on a live Zoom walkthrough. The inspector can physically hold up their phone, show you the cracked veneer on a cabinet door, and you can make an immediate executive decision right then and there.
But, the most important technological tool they wield is actually much simpler than live video.
What is it?
It's the time-stamped, geotagged photograph.
And this is where I want to play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say the inspector flags a minor issue, but the factory insists it's fine. What is to stop the factory from simply packing up broken furniture, and then when the container arrives in Los Angeles full of splintered wood, saying, oh, it looked perfect when it left our loading dock?
Yeah, the classic, it happened on the boat excuse.
Right. The ocean voyage was rough. The shipping company must have dropped the container. The factory blames the freight forwarder. The forwarder blames the factory, and I'm stuck holding the bag.
That exact scenario, the classic supply chain blame game, is why time-stamped photo documentation is your ultimate legal armor.
Okay. How does that work?
An inspector doesn't just check a box saying dimensions correct. They take a photograph of the digital caliper actively clamping the joint, showing the exact measurement on the screen, with a timestamp and a GPS location embedded right in the file's metadata.
Oh, wow.
They photograph the pristine packaging right before it goes into the container, and they photograph the locked security seal on the container doors.
So it creates a totally unbroken chain of custody.
Absolutely. If the product arrives broken in Los Angeles, you simply compare the damage to the pre-shipment photos.
Makes sense.
If the photos show the defect existed at the factory, you have concrete proof to force the supplier to refund you. If the photos show it was perfect when it left, you know exactly who to file your marine insurance claim with, the shipping company.
All right.
This kind of hard evidence holds up seamlessly with U.S. Customs and even in small claims disputes.
Well, visual defects and broken hinges are one thing, but there are invisible defects that are actually much more dangerous to a business because they can get your entire shipment seized by the government at the border.
This is the regulatory minefield of global trade. Quality control isn't just about making sure the furniture looks nice in a catalog, right? It is about ensuring it is legally and safely allowed to be sold in your target market.
Definitely. If you are importing into the U.S., there are some really strict compliance tests that have to be run. You have CPSC flammability standards for upholstery. You have to test for VOC's volatile organic compounds.
Right.
This is basically the invisible toxic gas that certain cheap glues and wood finishes release over time. You definitely do not want a baby crib off-gassing formaldehyde into a customer's nursery.
No, absolutely not. And there's also lead paint testing, which involves the inspector literally scraping a tiny piece of the finish off the wood and applying a chemical swab to see if it reacts to heavy metals.
Wow.
It costs a couple $100s, but it is absolutely vital, especially if you are working with a new supplier who might be sourcing cheap, unregulated paint.
Yeah.
And if you are importing wood products from Southeast Asia, you absolutely cannot forget the phytosanitary certificate from Vietnam's Department of Plant Protection.
Why is that specific piece of paper so important?
Because of Vietnam's tropical climate, raw wood can harbor native pests and invasive insects.
Oh, right.
The phytosanitary certificate proves the wood has been properly heat treated or fumigated. Without that hard evidence, U.S. Customs will X-ray your container, flag the biological risk, and either quarantine your goods indefinitely, charge you thousands of dollars to fumigate it at the port, or just force you to ship it all back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is a hard stop.
To put the real-world stakes of all this into perspective, there's a very famous case study in the industry about a Portland-based e-commerce retailer called Modern Living. They were buying 500 ready-to-assemble wardrobes from a new supplier.
Okay.
The wholesale cost was $22,500 FOB.
And FOB, or free on board, just means the price of the goods and the cost to get them physically loaded onto the ship at the Vietnamese port. It doesn't include the ocean freight across the Pacific.
So 22 grand in inventory. They plan to mark them up, sell them online, and clear about $40,000 in gross profit. It was a standard, high-margin furniture play. But they were smart enough to spend $500 to deploy a third-party inspector before the goods shipped out. The inspector pulled 30 random wardrobes out of the 500 to test.
And the results were alarming.
Here's where it gets really interesting. They found that 60% of those sample units had door gaps over half a centimeter.
Oh, that's bad.
They were wildly out of tolerance. When fully assembled, the doors were going to scrape against the frame and stick. The customers were going to be furious. But the plot twist is actually why it happened. It wasn't because the factory workers were cutting corners or being lazy.
No, it was a systemic mechanical failure on the factory floor. The assembly jig had failed.
Explain what a jig is.
A jig is essentially a rigid physical template that workers use to guide their cutting saws and drill presses so they don't have to manually measure every single piece of wood.
Right.
If you tape a stencil to a wall crookedly, every single letter you paint is going to be crooked.
Makes sense.
The factory's jig was misaligned by just a few millimeters, which meant every single piece of wood that went through that station was fundamentally mathematically flawed.
By spending just $500 on that external inspection, Modern Living caught the mechanical error before the container ever left Vietnam.
Thank goodness.
They showed the factory the time-stamped photos, proved the jig was broken, and forced a 7-day delay for a full factory rework. If they had skipped that inspection to save money, they calculated they would have faced $5,000 in immediate return shipping costs, terrible Amazon reviews, and a total loss of the inventory.
Exactly. This case study perfectly illustrates the core philosophy of remote sourcing. Third-party inspection transforms risk from a binary gamble, meaning you just cross your fingers and hope it's not a total catastrophe, into a managed, solvable process.
Right.
You identify and fix the systemic errors at the source where labor is cheapest.
But, playing bad cop and constantly sending inspectors to audit your factory sounds incredibly adversarial. If you have to fight with your supplier over every little defect, that's just exhausting. How does this system evolve from a policing action into an actual functional partnership?
Well, it evolved through a deliberate maturity model.
Eh,
You do not treat your 50th container order the exact same way you treat your first order.
Right.
The industry standard outlines 3 distinct stages of building trust.
Okay, stage 1 is for a brand new supplier. You do 100% inspection. You lay out the golden sample, you establish incredibly clear expectations, and you demand weekly progress photos. You are extremely hands-on and rigid.
Then you move to stage 2, the trust building phase. If the first few orders pass with flying colors, you drop down to maybe a 20% sample rate.
Okay.
Crucially, this is where you start sharing positive feedback. When they do a fantastic job, you let management know. The goal here is to get the factory to internalize your rigorous standards into their own internal IQC process.
And finally, stage 3 is the mature partnership. You move to risk-based inspections. You might only send an inspector to check the first 10 units off a new assembly line, or you only inspect the highly complex, high-risk components, trusting the factory to handle the rest.
Exactly.
But let me push back here. If I deliberately step down my oversight to just a small sample, aren't I basically inviting the factory to start cutting corners again the minute they realize my expensive inspector isn't breathing down their neck?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, mature importers don't just reduce inspections in a vacuum. They maintain a very strict, financially driven feedback loop.
Meaning what?
Meaning, when a factory consistently hits those high-quality targets without needing a babysitter, the buyer actively rewards them. They might offer better, faster payment terms or prioritize that specific factory for much larger, more lucrative future orders.
Oh, I see.
You fundamentally change the financial incentive. You make high quality more profitable for the factory than cutting corners. When you align their financial success with your brand success, they transition from being an adversary you have to constantly monitor into a true partner in manufacturing.
That fundamentally changes the dynamic. And honestly, even if you never import a single cabinet from Vietnam or deal with ocean freight, this entire framework is a brilliant masterclass in delegation.
It really is.
Whether you are managing a remote tech team, hiring a local contractor to renovate your kitchen, or overseeing any complex project where you physically aren't in the room, the core principles are exactly the same. Establish a golden sample so everyone knows exactly what good looks like. Don't let the system grade its own homework. And rely on independent verification to protect your reputation.
Exactly. It is about building a robust system that relies on verifiable data rather than purely on blind trust.
So what does this all mean? We've talked about digital calipers and $50,000 containers and the legal power of geotagged photos. Where is this entire industry heading next?
Well, think about the rapid trajectory of the technology we just discussed. If professional importers are already digitizing checklists on tablets and relying heavily on time-stamped photo documentation, this raises an important question.
What's that?
How long until AI computer vision is integrated directly into the factory floor cameras?
Oh, wow. Taking the human inspector out of the loop entirely, just cameras analyzing the wood as it moves.
Exactly. Imagine a near future where an algorithm instantly flags a 0.6 centimeter gap on a mortise and tenon joint the exact second it comes off the assembly line.
That's incredible.
It could alert the factory manager before the glue even dries, potentially eliminating the need for human auditors to travel to factories at all. How will manufacturers adapt when oversight isn't just the guy with a clipboard visiting once a month, but is absolute, instantaneous, and automated?
Wow.
It is going to completely redefine the speed and accuracy of global supply chains.
That is a wild thought to leave off on. An unblinking digital eye perfectly measuring every single joint on the production line. It certainly makes that terrifying moment of opening those heavy metal doors on a 40-foot container a whole lot less stressful.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of global quality control. And as always, keep asking questions.